Welcome to video 3, where I go over chapter 3, cost, volume, profit analysis. So chapter 3 is an outgrowth of chapter 2 in a few ways. So, like I said, cover cost, volume, profit analysis here, or just CVP analysis. I'll jump back and forth between those. They mean the same thing. Like this name suggests, we break our costs into variable costs and fixed costs, and then use this breakdown to see how much 2 volume is required to reach target 3 profit levels. So we used each of those 3 words, cost, then volume, then profit. CVP is important on its own, but if it helps you, you can think of it as, in some ways, an outgrowth of make or buy decisions that we talked about in chapter 2. Because in make or buy decisions, often, not always, but often, you're making a trade-off between fixed and variable costs. And those fixed and variable cost trade-offs that you make will affect how the profit levels rise and fall with volume. If you have more fixed costs, then you have to overcome more fixed costs before you reach profitability, before you have a positive profit, that is. If you have fewer fixed costs, you most likely have more variable costs, and therefore you have fewer dollars you have to put towards fixed costs to overcome the fixed costs that you incurred. But each sale probably has more variable costs that count against it, and you probably have a lower contribution margin, one of the terms we'll talk about in this chapter. And therefore your slope is actually a shallower slope. So overall, when you ramp up, you're probably going to have lower profits. So yeah, in this chapter, we'll go over topics like contribution margin and break-even point, which may be familiar to you, but we'll talk about them and try to ground them in the theory that we built in chapters 1 and 2. Chapter 3 is yet another chapter that I've moved to the front of the textbook instead of leaving it to languish in the back. It's important. I've found that it really helps you think like an economist. Remember, that's basically what managerial accountants are in a very applied way. Managerial accounting information helps managers understand the economic reality within the firm, hence it's applied economics. So in CVP analysis, we still help the firm maximize profit. Here are a couple ways in which that's true. First, in order to maximize the firm's profit, it helps if the firm doesn't go out of business. So CVP analysis helps you understand the firm's cost structure and the sales volume at which your business becomes profitable or unprofitable. This is an important precondition for maximizing profits in the long term. Second, taking a plan from the idea stage and implementing it is greatly helped by CVP analysis. It provides some important intermediate information that helps firms get from idea to reality. So, for example, CVP analysis will give us an idea. Oh, reaching the target profit requires that we produce and sell X amount of volume. That leads to follow-up questions. Can we handle that level of volume with our capacity? Will our fixed costs stay fixed at that volume? Are there volume discounts on variable costs we can consider? What costs are going to be incurred to get to that level of sales, such as sales commissions and so on and so forth? These are great examples of implementation questions that you might have to get you from chapter 2, we had this idea of maximizing profit, and now in order to put that into action, CVP analysis sometimes can help us bring up some questions that we need to bring that from plan to reality. So like I say in the textbook here, CVP analysis helps managers make decisions in decision spaces that are not like chapter 2, where you faced either or choices. Now, that might seem very limiting. I told you in chapter 2 that you could have more than 2 alternatives, and that's very true. But the problem is that as you get more and more alternatives, more and more columns in those relevant cost analysis tables, it becomes less and less useful for decision making. We just have limited attention spans and limited ability to juggle multiple ideas in our minds at the same time. So if you get 7 columns, 12 columns, 50 columns in your relevant cost analysis table, it becomes less and less useful for you. So CVP analysis is especially useful when the situation really begs for more than 2 options, more than a handful of options. And so we consider a continuous space in CVP analysis with literally an infinite number of possible outcomes along the number line. And of course, what that means is we need you, Algebra Jew. Yeah, we're going to create variables for quantity, price, and costs. And once we do that, that allows us to extrapolate on those variables and extract rules and check on how those variables relate to each other. That is the rates at which they change in relation to each other. So we're not playing a single game. We've generalized it through algebra, and so now we're playing more of a meta game, a game across games. We are in a way executing an order of magnitude higher level of thinking. So the first thing we do is we separate out the cost function into variable costs and fixed costs. So it's very critical that we understand what this actually means. You almost certainly heard these terms before. You may have a decent grasp on what it means, but I am often surprised how often people get it wrong when I ask them from just recall to define these for me. So I want you to tattoo this on your memory. Variable costs vary based on volume. Fixed costs don't. Keyword there is volume. Are we producing and selling more units? And does that drive costs up reliably and fairly certainly? Then it's a variable cost. And if we produce fewer units, does it drive it down? Yep, it's a variable cost. If we produce 100 units or 1,000 units or 1,000,000 units, do our fixed costs stay the same? Generally speaking, that means it's fixed cost. I said generally speaking for a reason there. Fixed costs do eventually change, of course, but even then, they tend to change by step. For example, you reach a certain level of volume and you need a new shift supervisor, or a new factory, or a new headquarters, like Amazon. Although Amazon's second headquarters was primarily an attempt to squeeze some corporate welfare out in the form of tax breaks and subsidies. But regardless, the firm is doing enough volume that, at least on the face, it seems justifiable that they would need a second headquarters. So variable costs, sometimes they don't change with volume. So if you have a promotion from your supplier where every 10th tire is free, then guess what? That 10 tires worth of increase of volume does not increase variable costs. So there are ways in which variable costs don't always increase with production or don't always decrease with production. It's not a perfect match. These are going to be approximations that we use that in a general sense allow us to view a rough outline of the firm and its cost structure. They've been used so frequently, and they're used across so many different industries that they've been proven to be successful. In almost all cases, companies can use this to get a better grasp on what they're doing and where they can go in the future. Even if it's not a perfect match, variable costs don't always go up and down with volume, and fixed costs don't always stay the same with volume. We still can use this and get good information out of it. So yes, again, tattoo this on your memories. Fixed and variable costs, what defines them is whether they reliably change with volume. Now, generally, fixed costs mean a little more commitment, and variable costs mean a little less commitment. That's not always true, but it goes along well enough that it's worth having that in your memory. So now we have two new functions. We have the cost function, of course, redefined this way. We've included volume, which is Q, for quantity of units produced and sold. We'll keep those the same for now. Quantity sold and quantity produced is the same. So V times Q, variable cost per unit, times number of units produced, plus just total fixed costs here. And we have this other new function of revenue, just price per unit times quantity of units that we sell. So now we can get to total contribution margin. Now, contribution margin, I love contribution margin. Once we separate costs into variable and fixed, the idea of contribution margin naturally emerges, and it ultimately becomes the most important variable in terms of many profit maximizing decisions. In fact, we can pretty easily get to the idea that total contribution margin drives profits algebraically here. So here I have the function that we had from chapter 1. Profit equals revenue minus costs. Just plugging in our new equations for revenue and costs. Revenue, cost. And I can simply rearrange, add fixed costs to both sides. And now I've rearranged, so it's pi plus fixed costs equals the difference between our revenue and variable costs. And this right-hand side of the equation is called total contribution margin. Sometimes textbooks or sources online or teachers will call it just contribution. They'll call it contribution ratio, unit contribution, total contribution. They'll just omit the margin word. I don't know why. sometimes it causes some confusion. Please don't get confused. It's the same thing. So we have total CM, total contribution margin, or just total contribution. It's the same idea. It's how much of our revenue dollars make it past the variable costs we had to incur to make those sales. What's left over? I can now restate the equation to say total contribution margin is profits plus fixed costs. In this way, now we see this idea of cost structure coming into play, because to get total contribution margin, we had to take out variable costs. So now we just have the leftovers. And now those leftovers are going to go to fixed costs. Of course, they're fixed, so we have to pay them. High level of commitment, typically with fixed costs. And then pi, profit, becomes simply a plug that goes up or down as our total contribution margin goes up or down, either covering and then having excess of fixed costs, or it becomes a loss if we don't have enough to cover fixed costs. I like my example here with taxes. You intuitively understand this. Even if it seems Greek to you, the idea of total contribution margin, you know how paychecks work. You know that the top line number on your paycheck is not what you take home. That's revenue. And then you have some variable costs in every country country or state or locality with an income tax, where you are in a bracket where there's an income tax rate charged to you. It's a rate for every dollar that you earn. There's a certain number of cents of taxes that you accrue. Here I've used the example of 40%, pretty steep tax there. So 40% of the dollars that you earn in top line revenue get taken out in tax, and then you have the net pay. This is like total contribution margin. Now this is the amount you take home. This is the amount that gets to your bank account and can make a difference there to help you pay rent, to help you pay insurance, to help you pay car loans and whatever you might have. And then whatever's left over after that, you can use to increase your savings, to buy extra things that you're hoping to increase your productivity in the future, to pay your loving cost accounting professors, whatever the case may be. So we can increase our pay, top line pay, from $1,000 to $2,000. That doesn't mean a $1,000 increase in contribution margin. Nope. It means a $600 increase in contribution margin because we had to increase our variable costs for taxes. Now we can jump into the idea of a unit contribution margin. And in fact, for many people, me included as a student, this was actually more intuitive to me than the idea of total contribution margin. I tended to want to think about individual widgets being sold and how much each widget was contributing to paying off fixed costs, and then after those fixed costs are paid, having some leftovers for profit and reinvestment in the company. So this is us simply taking that equation we had earlier for total contribution margin. I'll scroll up. Here's our equation for total contribution margin, and we're just going to factor out the quantity. And so now we have our quantity of units that's our volume, and we just have per unit, we have price of the unit minus its variable costs, and that gives us the unit contribution margin, just inside the parentheses here. That's revenue per unit, or price per unit, minus variable cost per unit. So now we're on a unit basis. And sometimes, like I said, for me too, this was easier to think about, easier to contextualize and think through examples to make sure I was doing the equations right. So yeah, now we're just going to put unit CM right here. And we can rearrange this because, let me go back up just for a second. We know that pi plus F can be substituted with total CM, total contribution margin. And so that's all I'm doing here in this equation down here. And so all I've done is taken total contribution margin and replaced it right here, and then divided both sides by Q. And for some reason, I decided to also flip the sides of the equation that they're on. But regardless, it's the same idea, identity principle here. We have unit CM equals just total contribution margin divided by the volume that we're talking about. So they have a relationship, total and unit contribution margin. If you find it easier to think about unit contribution margin, simply scale it up by the number of volume units that you have, the Q that you have, and that will get you total contribution margin. Again, as a student, that's always how I went. I prefer unit contribution margin, and I just multiplied it by the quantity when I wanted to get total contribution margin, when the professor asked me for total contribution margin. I hope that you can be a little more versatile than I was, and I've grown to be more versatile too, because there's some things where total contribution margin is very useful, and if you're handicapped because you have these extra steps you have to do to get total contribution margin because you can't think in those terms, it will start to gum up some of the gears. You'll go a little slower. You'll have more potential for error in your mental calculations. It just can create some problems. We can also express this not in a per unit basis, but in a per dollar basis. So this comes to contribution margin ratio. So I've simply taken the equation for unit contribution margin. Back up here, right here, unit contribution margin that's in the parentheses. And now I'm going to factor out a P as well. So I'm going to factor out a P to go along with the Q. So that means we have a 1 right here. P over P equals 1 minus V over P. So sometimes people get into a lot of interest in this one right here, the variable cost ratio. I don't go into big depth on that. So now I have on this outside, remember way back up above, we have our revenue function, and revenue is PQ. So now we've got a PQ, and we can start to think in terms of total revenue times this contribution margin ratio will give us total contribution margin. Remember, this is also substitutable by with total CM. So this contribution margin ratio allows us to move directly from total sales to total contribution margin, which can be useful in a lot of problems. In fact, when we do multi-product CVP, it's a huge shortcut, really a big time saver, assuming we have a constant sales mix. So we have total revenue here times this contribution margin ratio equaling total CM. And the way I like to think of it is I think of its unit contribution margin, but per dollar. Not per unit that we sell, but per dollar in sales that we make. $1 in sales minus this variable cost ratio gives us the cents left over out of each dollar that goes towards contribution margin to pay fixed costs and then have a profit left over. So you multiply that by how many dollars of sales we have, P times Q, total revenue, and you'll get total contribution margin. So, like I said, inside the parentheses, this 1 minus V over P, or variable cost ratio, sometimes it's called, is our CM ratio, our contribution margin ratio, or sometimes people just call it contribution ratio. Now we can rearrange this equation, again, substituting the left-hand side of this equation for total CM, and divide it by total sales, or R dot, PQ, all interchangeable. So we have total CM over total sales equals CM ratio. And right here, I just flipped the sides of the equation. So CM ratio equals total CM over total sales. Also, because total CM has a quantity in it, that's Qs. Total CM is this right here, PQ minus VQ. And total sales is PQ. We can actually just cancel out the Qs in this and get the same ratio when we have unit CM over price. If it helps you think about it, price is simply revenue per unit. So we have unit contribution margin per unit over revenue per unit. Same ratio. That's one of the beautiful things about CM ratio. As a student, I hated it. It seemed foreign. I did not like it. I would, every chance I get, transfer it over into a unit CM value. I could more easily apply that trade, simpler to me. But it's an amazing tool because it scales up with volume. It expresses something important about the trade-off that you've made in your company too. CM ratio plus the degree of operating leverage that we'll talk about later in the chapter together basically lay out the entire story of what trade-off you've made between variable costs and fixed costs. Right, the higher the CM ratio, the more cents are getting through for each dollar of sales that you make, which means you have fewer variable costs. And so therefore you've traded off probably fewer variable costs, which almost certainly means you have some fixed costs in there that you're trying to get some leverage on. Trying to get some economies of scale. Now, target profit and break-even analysis. These are the same thing. Most students, when they get to this point, they say, oh yeah, no, I know about break-even analysis, but this is very foreign. To which my response is, it actually isn't that foreign. You've done that. You've done it's the same analysis. You've actually just done it. Break-even analysis is simply a simplified version of target profit analysis. Just one extra little step you've done. So I'll start with target profit and then show how break-even analysis is a special case of target profit analysis. So again, my initial comfort level in each of these problems when I was a student was to go with unit CM. and I can solve, ultimately what we're trying to do is solve for Q. We're trying to figure out what the optimal volume of units is in this version of it, units sold at a target profit. So we have some target profit that we're trying to produce. We also have fixed costs that our firm has decided upon, and we have a unit CM, which is determined by how many variable costs we incur per unit of sold. So we have our entire cost structure laid out here, and a target profit based likely on some sort of global factors or larger scale factors, what kind of cost of capital we have, what kind of investment risk we're running, things like that. Or where we think where the marketing folks have told us we can reach as far as market share goes. We have some sort of target profit. Something perhaps from chapter 2 that we landed on. Hey, if we're going to make this decision work, we have to have a target profit of XYZ. So we're ultimately trying to isolate this Q, which is simply a matter of dividing both sides by unit CM, and that's what we have right here. The unit CMs cancel out on the right hand side of the equation, and they stick in the bottom here. And so simply, we are taking unit CM and dividing profit plus fixed cost by unit CM. And that will give us the quantity at target profit. It's sometimes really useful to think of this target profit as a fixed cost. Even if it's not actually a fixed cost, maybe think of it as a promissory note to yourself. Oh, you know what? If we have this target profit, then we're basically telling ourselves, yeah, we can earn $500,000 for this period. We can earn $5 million, $500 million, whatever scale of our business is. We can earn that amount. That's almost a note that we have written to ourselves. And so you might be more familiar with break-even analysis, which simply says this is zero. We're just talking about fixed costs over unit contribution margin. Perhaps that's what you're more familiar with. In that case, simply think of the profit as one of the fixed costs that you have. And that really is the same analysis. Contribution margin ratio looks very similar. Here, we're going to look at what dollar sales we need at the target profit, total revenue we need at target profit. And so we have our equation for CM ratio, where your CM ratio times total revenue will give us our profits plus fixed cost. And we just divide both sides by CM ratio, and we isolate total revenue here. This is the total revenue we need to get to this target profit, covering our fixed costs and putting all our revenue dollars through this ratio to get our contribution margin per dollar. Now, all these terms are connected. So we have unit contribution margin. Again, this was king back when I was a student. And unit contribution margin in the denominator under target profit and fixed costs gives us the quantity required, the volume required for target profit. Now, you can start over here too. You have CM ratio, have that in the denominator under the sum of target profit and fixed costs, and that will give us the total revenue required for target profit. And simply, total revenue required for target profit divided by the price per unit gives us the number of units per profit. And if we had number of units required for target profit, multiplied it by the price per unit, we get our total revenue. So we have this highway going on right here. Also, of course, you can take unit contribution margin, divide it by P, by the price per unit, and you get your CM ratio. You can take your CM ratio, multiply it by price per unit, and you get your unit contribution margin. So these move side to side and then get you either you're looking at dollar sales per target profit or unit sales per target profit. Often, like I said, I would start here and the question was asking for dollar sales, and I would simply try to move across. If I were more comfortable with CM ratio, I could do one step. Simply calculate the CM ratio and move down to get target sales, total sales for target profit. Now, break-even analysis, again, it's simply getting rid of that pie, saying, hey, well, break-even means that we have a profit of zero. It means we've covered all our fixed costs, and of course our variable costs, they never come through the fence, if you will, to become contribution margin. And so we just have fixed costs over unit CM to give us quantity at break-even. CM ratio, we have our fixed costs divided by CM ratio. That gives us the total revenue at break-even. So very important analysis. Like I said, first step for maximizing your profit for your business is to keep your business in business. We have a term here, margin of safety. So margin of safety is how far away from this break-even point you are. And this could be either in units, how far away from Q are you in terms of how many units you're selling, or it could be in dollars. How far away is your total revenue from the PQ required for break-even? So you simply take your current sales or some projected sales in either units or sales dollars, and you subtract those from the required break even, either in units or sales dollars. You got to keep those together though. You got to move those in tandem. So if you're taking your current sales in units, you subtract away the break even in units. Taking your current sales in sales dollars, then you have to subtract away the PQ required for break even in sales dollars. This is an important figure that can capture how far away your firm is from the break even point, maybe help it understand the risk that it's facing. Now, multi-product firms. So, like I said in chapter 2, multi-product firms are the more interesting variety. I said this when I talked about the keep or drop decision, excuse me. This is the more interesting variety, and in fact, it's the norm. Most companies out there will have some sort of family of products. Maybe they'll have a leader that's the most important product, but they'll often have some tag-on products alongside. There's a lot of chances for interdependency when you're deciding upon products. Now, it doesn't work so simply as just taking one of those products and doing this analysis. You can use this analysis, but you now have to use composite units. So you have to take some sort. Let me just stop there. These are simply the CM ratio equation and the CM unit equation, and I just put composite in front of every time there's a unit. So composite unit quantity that we need to reach target profit. CM ratio per composite unit down here. Now, what do I mean by composite unit? What I mean is, because we're a multi-product firm, often what we'll do to make this analysis simpler is we'll say we have a certain bundle of units that we sell. We have a sales mix that we're going to expect, and if I were mean, I would say, here's the sales mix right now. We're also going to vary it in the future, and now you should do the composite unit analysis based on that. But I'm not that mean. I'm mean, but not that mean. So we have a sales mix of XYZ. In this example, we have hammers, nails, and saws in a 2 to 5 to 1 sales mix. 2 hammers for every 5 boxes of nails for every 1 saw. So we have a sales mix. And so therefore, we're going to create a composite unit. We're going to create a bundle of items that has in it 2 hammers, 5 boxes of nails, and 1 saw. We're going to act like that is a unit of sale. We're going to act like that's the only way we sell our products, just for this analysis. We're not actually going to change anything in store. Don't worry about that. This is not a policy decision. We're just using it for the analysis. I've also seen it where you'll get fractional composite units. I don't want to worry about that. Just we'll focus on doing it this way. I think it works a little better. Just whole units based on our sales mix. In that case, to do fractional, you would take each of these and divide it by the total. So 2 divided by 8, 5 divided by 8, 1 divided by 8. And you'd end up with 0.25 hammers, 0.625 boxes of nails, and 0.125 saws per bundle. Don't worry, not doing that. Throughout the textbook, I'm going to use whole units. So we have a big bundle of units. We act like every customer comes in either buys 1 or more of these composite units in a bundle. And now we can, because we're going to hold this helps us hold the sales mix constant for this analysis. And now we can just simply say, well, we need to figure out the unit CM for the composite unit. So if hammers have a unit CM per hammer of $5, boxes of nails have a unit CM of $1.50 per box of nails, saws have a unit CM of $8 per saw, then we have 5 times 2 equals 10. 1.5 times 5 equals 7.5, and 8 times 1 equals 8. Sum those all together, you end up with composite unit CM of $25.50. So if it were true, the customer has to come in, and each time they purchase something, they have to buy 2 hammers, 5 boxes of nails, and 1 saw, then our contribution margin from that purchase, from one of those bundles, would be $25.50. And so I'm saying that you can simply take that $25.50 and put it right here and divide your target profit and fixed costs, the sum of them here in the numerator, and you will get your composite unit quantity required at target profit. Now then you've got to take them out of composite units, because this composite unit these are how many bundles of those 8 units, 2 hammers, 5 boxes of nails, 1 saw, you need to reach target profit. And so you have to convert that back into individual units. So for example, if the question either your teacher or the department manager is asking you is, say for example, well, I just want to know how many boxes of nails we have to sell. You can't just stop at this number. You have to multiply this number by 5 because there are 5 boxes of nails per composite unit in this example. Okay. Similar to CM ratio, we can do the same idea. We can take taking this very similar or the same example, and now I have to have the price per unit so I can get a CM ratio out of it. We have total revenue for the 2 hammers in the composite unit of $20. Total revenue for the nails in this is revenue, not contribution. Total revenue for the nails in the composite units, 5 boxes of nails is $10. And then we have total revenue of $20 for the 1 saw in each composite unit. So now we have a $50 price per composite unit. And remember, way back up, we have CM ratio is simply unit CM divided by price. So we have the composite unit CM up here, $25.50 divided by the price per composite unit, the total revenue we have per composite unit. So all I'm doing here is, so from that we could get a CM ratio. Here I've actually just gone ahead and said, oh, we said we needed 80 composite units. Right here, 80 composite units. I can multiply that by P to get total sales. So when I was walking you through it in my voice, I was saying, here's composite unit CM, divide that by P to get CM ratio, and then we could drive down to total sales required for target profit. What I did in the example here is I stayed here, which is the end result that I had in the first example, and then multiplied it by the price per composite unit right here. Per bundle, if it helps you think of it that way. Per bundle is a composite unit. Each bundle is a composite unit. All right, now, as far as this goes, actually, this is one of the reasons why I think it's useful for you to be comfortable with unit CM, CM ratio, and total contribution margin, all 3 terms, because you can actually avoid all of this Excel work. You would do this in Excel. You'd say $10 per hammer times 2 hammer equals 20. You'd have those 3 cells lined up. And then you do that for each unit to build your composite units for revenue. And then up here, you would build the same idea right here in different cells for your contribution margin for your composite units. You do this in Excel, yeah, almost always. That's one of the reasons why I try to simplify these problems when I ask you on tests, because you might not have Excel accessible based on the testing environment. But in reality, in real practice, you would do this analysis in Excel, or you'd have some sort of a macro or in-house program or out-of-the-box program that would do it for you just in the background. Simple multiplication. Computers are great at crunching numbers like that. But you can avoid all that by having these top-line numbers. So a single multi-product firm has total sales of $2 million, total variable costs of $1.2 million, and fixed costs of $100,000. And you have a target profit of $400,000. Now it has a sales mix and cost structure that are expected to stay the same. This is a critical assumption. Most of this sales mix part is the critical assumption. If the sales mix is staying the same, then it's embedded in this number and this number. Your sales mix led to the amount of revenue you earned, and it led to the variable cost that you incurred. If you had a sales mix that favored a very high variable cost product that you were selling, then it's reflected in this ratio right here. And so when we get to the CM ratio from these numbers, it's going to have embedded in it the assumed sales mix. You don't have to go into the details and know what the sales mix is. I could ask you this question and never tell you what the sales mix is or what the products are. But you can take the top line numbers here, as long as we assume the sales mix stays constant between periods, and simply say we have a CM ratio of 0.4. So we have 2 million in sales minus 1.2 million in variable costs gives us 800,000 in the numerator right here, divided by the 2 million in sales gives us a 0.4 CM ratio. Let me go back up and show you what I'm doing. Right here. right here. I'm taking total CM, which is 2 million in revenue minus 1.2 million in variable cost. That's total contribution margin. And I'm dividing it by the 2 million in revenue, total sales. That gives us the CM ratio of 0.4 in this case. Okay, now we don't need to know the sales mix. We don't need to know the sales mix. We know the CM ratio. When you have that sales mix, that we had last year, that's going to stay the same this year, we assume, is 40% or 0.4. And so to get our target profit of, after covering fixed cost of $100,000, a target profit of $400,000, means that we just divide the sum of those, 100,000 plus 400,000 equals 500,000, divided by 0.4 will give us, we need total sales of 1.25 million to reach our target profit. We just sailed right over the sales mix question. Saved us a lot of building composite units, converting our unit CM into composite units, and then reconstituting individual product lines out of the composite unit quantity that we get here. We just sailed right over top of it. All right, so degree of operating leverage. Now, I tried at one point to Google this term a few years back, and I think finance has a very different definition of this, or some other areas in business have a different definition of operating leverage. And so I think the distinction I'm making is I'm calling it degree of operating leverage. I've seen this in every management accounting textbook that I'm aware of. So it's a term that we use, and they might still be the same term. Honestly, I'm not 100% sure. Perhaps elsewhere in business, they still call it degree of operating leverage, but means something else. In this context, we're going to use this term to mean total contribution margin over pi, profit. So CM ratio told us how we're getting from total sales down to contribution margin. We have our total CM over total sales. It's a ratio that expresses what percent of total sales makes it through. In this case, it looks like it's 3/4 or 2/3. So it would be a CM ratio of 0.75 or 0.67. Now, our degree of operating leverage takes us the rest of the way down to profit. Once we have total CM, how much of that is taken up by fixed costs? So we have total CM over profit, which is just total CM less our fixed costs. And now that will be a number greater than 1, unless we're losing money, I suppose. But the idea is we have total CM, and we're going to have that divided by profit. So in this case, it looks kind of like we have twice as much CM, if I'm reading these rectangles right, as we have profit. So that would be a DOL, a degree of operating leverage of 2. Total CM in the numerator, profit in the denominator. So these are flipped. These numbers are going to give you some different kind of numbers. CM ratio is always or almost always going to be less than 1, because it's the percent of total sales that makes it through total CM, and the best you can do is have no variable costs. If it were increasing between total sales and total contribution margin, I'm not sure why you would call it a variable cost. You would just call that some sort of extra part of sales. So yeah, no, it's always going to be less than 1 or less than 1. And over here, we're talking about how many dollars of total contribution margin do we need. Down here, degree of operating leverage, we're talking about how many dollars of total contribution margin we need to get $1 of profit. Kind of flipped it around. This number will always be greater than 1 unless we have no fixed costs at all, in which case our total contribution margin will be equal to profits because we're not taking out any fixed costs. Okay, so between the two of them, CM ratio and degree of operating leverage, it tells you what you need to know about the firm's cost structure. How much have they traded off variable costs versus fixed costs? Again, typically, a firm will make those trade-offs. What is normal variable costs or fixed costs might vary from industry to industry, but within the industry, different firms are going to pursue different strategies, trading off your fixed costs versus your variable costs, in large part based on their anticipation of the future. Do they think they have a sure winner on their hands? This is the phrase I use down here. And they think it's going to scale up? Or do they think they have something that is a little more tenuous, either because it's on its last legs, it's had a recent change in its favorability with the market, or because it's getting outdated, in which case maybe you've shifted more towards the variable cost side, so you don't have those long-term commitments after the product is dead and gone. This tells you, are you locked in to get economies of scale with long-term debt, long-lived assets, contracts with long time horizons, and so forth, these fixed costs? Or are you being more flexible in case of a downturn in in uh, a sales dip, which would be if you're saying, well, I want more variable costs so that, hey, if I don't have to make the sales, I don't owe the money. So a high degree of operating leverage and a high CM ratio means that you've opted towards fixed costs. They because the equations are kind of flipped from what you might expect them. One, CM ratio is 1 or lower, and degree of operating leverage is 1 or higher. If they're both higher in the scale, then that means you have traded off your variable costs for fixed costs. It's all relative, of course. Like I said, within the industry, what are the norms? Are you high for your industry, for your situation as a business? And it means you're often trying to scale up. If you have a low degree of operating leverage and a low contribution margin ratio, then you're likely trying to reduce your exposure to risks of sales dips or otherwise trading off your profitability if the product takes off. A lot of times when you watch that fun show Shark Tank, they are trying to move entrepreneurs who have pursued this path into this path, assuming the sharks like the product. They think it'll scale up. They think that they bring to the table the expertise and the network that will help it scale up across the country, across the world, wherever. And so they're willing to say, well, take me on as a partner. I'll give you capital and an investment of some kind for ownership. And likely what I will do is I will suggest to you that we load up on some fixed costs that will help this scale up. Some fixed costs in terms of distribution, some fixed costs in terms of machinery, in terms of long-term contracts, these kinds of things to help us get economies of scale. I think it's going to take off. That's what the sharks are betting on. All right. Now, at the beginning of the chapter, I didn't say it in my verbal spiel, but in the beginning of the chapter, I introduced chapter 3 in terms of special order decisions. So if we go back to chapter 2, special order decisions, I told you, are not given a lot of talk in chapter 2 because we have a limited paradigm for our decisions. We're stuck in this realm where we need to construct a column with an alternative. And so we really need to know all the parameters of that alternative to construct that column. We need to set price, in other words. We have some special customer, or they think they're special, and they want a price discount, and they have the price in hand. It's take it or leave it. Often that's not the case. Often customers don't know how special they are, or they think they're too special. I don't know how far to take this analogy, but my silly joke, the idea is sometimes there's room for negotiation. And so this goes right along with the ideas of the CVP analysis. We have some special orders, and we can now calculate the price floor when there is no set special order price. That's take it or leave it. Somebody comes in with a special order. They're open to negotiation. They're pitching some price discount perhaps, but you get the sense, or you know from your experience with them, or they even say themselves that they're willing to negotiate how much of a price discount they're going to get because they're giving you some large special order. In this case, it really helps to know how low your price can go so you don't accept an offer below that. Otherwise, you're losing money. We can do that with a very simple transformation of our unit CM equations. We have unit CM here in the parentheses, quantity, our volume, and then profit and fixed costs. So in this case, the floor is our break-even point, the point at which our profit will equal 0. We don't want to go below this. So we're going to make profit equal 0, nice and simple. So we have our fixed costs equal our unit CM, P minus V, times our Q. And so now what we can simply do is divide both sides by Q. So I have F over Q equals P minus V. And then add variable costs over here. And then we get the price at which our profit equals 0, given all the assumptions that we have for the case. That's what this equation right here is. The price floor in this case, is our fixed costs over quantity plus our variable cost per unit. So think about this for a second. The minimum price we want to sell each unit in this special order is equal to the variable costs for that unit and that unit's share of our fixed costs, or fixed cost divided by total units that we're talking about. So we have 100 units, and that one unit needs to cover 1/100th of the fixed costs plus its own variable costs. That's the floor. Very simple. Not quite so simple. Now, we have two extra kind of fixed costs that come up. Our special fixed costs that we have to have for the special order. Maybe they're so special they want not just a price discount, perhaps have some special mold that they want us to buy or buy rights to because they have some special trademarked logo that they want on their shirts or on their products that we're going to produce for them. Or perhaps we need to buy special software so that we can process this special order. Perhaps we have some sort of fixed cost to gain licensing rights for this particular instance. But the idea is something special about this fixed cost, some fixed cost that is special to this special order. And where a lot of people get tripped up is capacity. That's also a fixed cost of taking the order. Because if we have limited capacity and they're asking for enough units that we can't cover it with our excess capacity, let's say we have 1,000 units we can produce in a period in our factory. We are currently at 900 units that we're producing. So we have excess capacity of 100 units. We can produce 100 units without any changes. They'll just use our excess capacity. What if they're asking for 200 units? What it means is that in order to cover the 200 units that they want, we have to kick out effectively 100 units worth of customers taking the regular cost. So we have to factor that in as a fixed cost of taking the special order. If we take the special order, we have to lose those units in a contribution margin of those 100 people we have to kick out, if you will, 100 units worth of people we have to kick out. And if we take the special order, if we pass on the special order, we don't have to incur that. It's a fixed cost of taking the special order. We don't have to kick those customers out if we don't take the special order. So here, I don't tell you exactly what the capacity is. I simply say that it's going to result, accepting the special order is going to result in kicking out 300 regular paying customers worth of assuming each customer buys one unit, kicking out 300 regular paying customers in order to fill the order. Now, if each paying customer earns me $3 per unit, they're each buying just one unit, 10 minus 7 equals $3 unit contribution margin, then kicking out 300 of them is an opportunity cost of $900. That's the opportunity cost, that's a fixed cost for taking this special order. So again, $10 revenue per unit minus $7 variable cost per unit gives us $3 of unit contribution margin. Those $3 times the number of units that I'm losing equals $900 of total lost contribution margin. So this special order has to cover that $900 divided by the number of units in the special order. They have to cover that lost contribution margin for me, or it's not going to be worth it. Now, one of the last ideas that we have in this chapter is constrained resource decisions. And here we're going to talk about our first theory of constraints idea. We're talking about it in a very general way. I've sometimes heard this called profitability analysis, although I think that term can be applied too widely. I don't like that term for this. So these are constrained resource decisions. So we have a firm that sells multiple products, and you can estimate demand for each of those products, different product lines, that is. There's some limited demand, and we have a limited key resource, the constraint, that is insufficient to fill all of the product line's demand. Now, this key resource this question only gets really interesting when this key resource is shared by all or most of the product lines. So we have to now get the biggest bang for our buck from our limited key resource here to get the most contribution margin and profit from our product lines to fill as many product lines demand as we can. So what we have to do effectively is rank order the products based on contribution margin per unit of constraint. So here's the equation that we're going to use. So constrained unit CM is unit contribution margin per units of constraint used for each product unit. Now in this table, I give you an example of why this is important, how you can maximize your contribution margin by taking into account the constraint. So we have some sort of constraint here, 15,000 units of constraint. I don't know what it is. Some sort of rare earth metal that we can't get more of in the current period. We only have so much that we can get in a period. We have some sort of trade restraint. This is the maximum number of units we can trade across international boundaries. We have some sort of scarce resource of time, 15,000 minutes of some expert's time within the period. We have 15,000 machine hours available from some sort of specialized machinery, whatever the case may be, some sort of constraint that we only have so much of within the period. And we've figured out this is the limiting factor for our profitability. And we have set demand for each of the products: 1,000 for product 1, 2,500 units for product 2, 1,750 units for product 3. And each product uses a different amount of the constraint, different number of units for the constraint. So each product unit for product 1 uses 2.5 constraint units. I don't know, 2.5 machine hours if the constraint is a machine. Let's just keep going with that example. Product 2 uses 10 machine hours per product unit. Per one product 2 unit, we use 10 machine hours. Product 3 uses 4. So that's the disparity here, 2.5 and 10 and 4. They use very different amounts of machine hours for this on this constraint. So that's going to be a big factor, or eventually. Now, we have our prices and our variable costs. By now you're experts in contribution margin and CM. So you know that, well, I know $10 price, $7 variable cost. That gives me $3 unit CM. Likewise, $15 for product 2 for our price, $8 in variable cost gives me $7 of unit contribution margin. And for product 3, $25 in price minus $14 in variable cost gives me $11 in unit contribution margin. Now we just line those up by contribution margin, raw contribution margin per unit. We have, obviously, product 3 is the most important one. We should produce that one first. It's $11 in contribution margin per unit. $7 for product 2, so that's number 2 in our priority, and $3 for per unit for product 1, so it's going to be number 3. So we'll start over here with product number 1. We'll fill all of our demand for that, 1,750. That uses up 7,000 units of the constraint. That's 1,750 times 4. So that's almost half of our constraint used to produce all of product 3, $19,250 of contribution margin, filling that demand. Then we use the rest of our constraint, 8,000 units worth, to complete 800 units, because it's 10 constraint units per unit product 2. 800 product 2 units. That gives us $5,600 of total contribution margin. And then we have no leftovers to even finish our demand. There's 2,500 units of demand for product 2. We can't even finish it, and much less go on to product 3. So our total contribution margin here is $24,850. Now, if we took into account the fact that they use different amounts of the constraint, and that is going to be what limits how many units we can meet of our demand for these different products, then we would come up with a different answer, which would maximize our contribution margin. So we're going to take unit CM divided by the constraint units per product, per unit. So we have 1.2, which is $3 divided by 2.5 constraint units per product unit for product 1, $1.2. That's how many that's how many contribution dollars we get per unit of constraint used through product 1. Product 2, we take $7 of unit CM divided by 10 constraint units per product. That gives us 70 cents. That's the contribution margin that comes per unit of the constraint when we're using that constraint on product 2. Product 3 stays the best. It's got $11 of contribution margin per unit and only 4 machine hours, like we were saying, of constraint units used. And so it ends up at $2.75. That's how many contribution margin dollars we get per unit of constraint used to produce product 3. So now our order changes slightly. Number 3 is still number 1. It's our top priority, number 1 priority. But now, instead of product 2 being our next priority, actually product 1 is our next priority to produce, because it has the next highest constraint unit contribution margin. So we'll max out again our product 3, because it's top priority, producing 1,750 units of product 3, using 7,000 constraint units, getting $19,250 in contribution margin from that. And then we'll shift over to product 1 and produce all 1,000 of those units, because we only take those 2.5 units of the constraint, so we can produce all 1,000 units there and meet all the demand for product 1. That gives us 2,500 constraint units we use. That means we have some left over. 7,000 plus 250 is only 9,500. We still have some leftovers here. And we get $3,000 of total contribution margin from that. And then we use the leftovers, all 5,500 of units of the constraint, to produce 550 product 2 units, which gives us $3,850 of total contribution margin. Look, we have maximized, we've increased our total contribution margin from this setup, $26,100 versus before, when we did not consider the constraint, $24,850. Now, might not seem like a lot to you, but obviously the scale could be bigger. The differences between the products could be bigger. Perhaps this is in thousands of dollars anyway, and you're shaking a stick at $1.3 million almost. This all flowed out of our desire to separate the C function into fixed and variable costs. It just naturally came about. And with that, that's it for chapter 3. Bye.